What if the person you dismissed as insignificant, someone you judged in a fleeting, arrogant moment, held the power to redefine your entire legacy? What if a simple, overlooked detail, like a worn wedding band, could unravel the very fabric of your carefully constructed world and force you to confront the uncomfortable truth of who you've become? Our story begins on a treacherous night in rural upstate New York, where the teeth of winter had sunk deep into the land and a blizzard was rewriting the landscape, one silent, swirling flake at a time. The wind, a feral beast, howled around Dr. Laya Grant's aging but sturdy pickup truck. Snowflakes, thick as cotton bolls, plastered the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle. Lila, 38, her face etched with a quiet determination that years of community organizing had forged, gripped the wheel, her knuckles white beneath worn leather gloves. She was a woman accustomed to navigating storms, both literal and metaphorical. 2 children were waiting for her at home, expecting pancakes for dinner, a small, warm comfort against the raging storm. Suddenly, a pair of luminous eyes flashed in the swirling whiteness. A deer, frozen in terror. Lila wrenched the wheel, her heart leaping into her throat. The pickup fishtailed, tires screaming a protest on the ice-slicked asphalt before she wrestled it back under control. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Easy, girl," she murmured to the truck, or perhaps to herself. As her pulse began to settle, her headlights, cutting a swathe through the blizzard's chaos, landed on something incongruous, the sleek, obsidian bulk of a luxury SUV, nose down into a deep, snow-filled ditch. It looked like a wounded panther out of its element, defeated by the raw, untamed power of the storm. Inside, Julian Hartwell, 45, tech mogul and architect of a digital empire, was anything but defeated. He was incandescent with fury. "Useless," he snarled, jabbing a finger at his state-of-the-art smartphone, which stubbornly displayed no service. His Italian leather shoes were already damp, his bespoke suit felt constricting, and the prospect of missing his private jet out of Albany filled him with a rage that was almost volcanic. He was a man who commanded, who dictated, who bent the world to his will. This was an unacceptable rebellion by nature itself. Lila pulled up beside the stranded vehicle. Rolling down her window, she let in a blast of frigid air and snow. "Looks like you're in a bit of a spot," she called out, her voice calm, carrying easily over the wind's lament. Julian glared at her through his own window, a momentary flash of surprise crossing his features. A black woman, in a beat-up truck, offering help? He was expecting, well, he wasn't sure what he was expecting, but not this. He prided himself on reading people, on sizing them up, slotting them into categories. This woman, with her steady gaze and the lines of weariness and strength around her eyes, didn't fit neatly. He grudgingly rolled down his window. "Tell me something I don't know," he snapped. His voice laced with the impatience of a man whose time was measured in millions per minute. "Can you call a tow truck? My phone's dead." Lila shook her head. "No service out here in a storm like this, not for miles. But I've got chains and a winch. I can probably pull you out." Julian eyed her pickup skeptically. It looked like it had seen better decades. "That thing?" he asked, a sneer curling his lip. "Against this?" He gestured to his SUV, a marvel of engineering and expense. Lila merely smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips. "Don't judge a book by its cover, Mr. Hartwell." Julian Hartwell. He said it as if the name itself should command respect, perhaps even awe. "Dr. Laya Grant," she replied, offering no such expectation. "Well, Mr. Hartwell, this thing has pulled bigger vehicles out of worse spots. You want to spend the night here, or you want to take a chance?" The thought of spending the night in this frozen wasteland, in his expensive but currently useless car, was intolerable. "Fine," he conceded, the word clipped. "Do it. But if you scratch the paint?" Lila ignored the implied threat. She was already out of her truck, pulling heavy-duty chains from the bed. The wind whipped her locks around her face as she expertly assessed the angle, the depth of the ditch, the purchase her tires would need. Julian watched from the warmth of his car, a flicker of grudging admiration warring with his innate arrogance. She moved with an efficiency that spoke of experience, her movements economical and sure. It took 20 minutes of skilled maneuvering. The roar of Lila's engine battling the howl of the wind, the chains groaning under the strain. But finally, with a triumphant surge, the luxury SUV was back on the road, its dignity somewhat restored, though its owners was still smarting. Julian climbed out, brushing imaginary snow from his cashmere coat. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and thrust it at Lila. "Here," he said, his eyes flicking dismissively over her patched gloves and worn parka. "Keep the change." The smirk was back, a familiar mask of superiority. Lila looked at the bill, then at his face. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her own. She pushed his hand away gently. "No, thank you, Mr. Hartwell." Glad I could help. Just pay it forward sometime. Julian frowned and used to such refusals. Everyone has a price, he said, a cynical edge to his voice. What's yours? Some things aren't for sale, Lila said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to get back into her truck. Drive carefully. The roads are only going to get worse. As she opened her truck door, the interior light flashed on briefly. Julian's sharp eyes, trained to notice details that could mean profit or loss, caught a glint of gold and stone on her left hand. It was her wedding ring. For a split second, the intricate design, the deep, lustrous glow of a central gem surrounded by smaller, brilliant stones, registered. It wasn't just a ring, it was significant. It looked old, an heirloom perhaps, and inexplicably, undeniably valuable. Far more valuable, his finely tuned instinct for assessing worth told him, than his own platinum and diamond chronometer, a timepiece that cost more than most people's cars. He blinked. The woman in the battered truck with the worn gloves and the quiet dignity who had refused his money was wearing a fortune on her finger? It didn't compute. It was a discordant note in the symphony of his assumptions. Laya Grant was already pulling away, her taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. Julian Hartwell stood by his rescued SUV, the $100 bill still clutched in his hand, a strange unease settling over him. The blizzard raged on, but for a moment it was the image of that unexpected ring, glinting in the fleeting light, that chilled him more than the wind. Who was she? To understand Laya Grant and the true value of the ring that caught Julian Hartwell's eye, we must travel back in time. Back to the heart of Chicago's South Side, the year 2010. A place of fierce pride and stark realities where hope often wrestled with hardship. The air in room 203 of Carver High was thick with the smell of old textbooks, floor wax, and the simmering energy of 30 teenagers on a sweltering late spring afternoon. Lila, then a passionate, idealistic English teacher in her late 20s, her locks shorter, her smile quicker, wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. Beside her, her husband, Marcus, a history teacher with a booming laugh and eyes that saw the potential in every student, was trying to explain the nuances of the civil rights movement over the rumble of a faulty air conditioner and the distant wail of a siren. A soundtrack too common in their neighborhood. Carver High was chronically underfunded. Textbooks were outdated, technology was scarce, and the building itself seemed to sigh with exhaustion. But Lila and Marcus, along with a handful of other dedicated educators, poured their souls into its classrooms. They believed in these kids who were too often written off, kids who navigated daily challenges that would crush most adults. Remember, Marcus's voice resonated, cutting through the lethargy. Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But it doesn't bend on its own people. We have to be the ones pulling that arc every single day. Lila watched him, her heart swelling with love and pride. They were a team, partners in life and in purpose, their shared dream to ignite a spark in these young minds, to show them pathways beyond the confines of their circumstances. Their own 2 children, Maya, then just a toddler, and baby Noah, were growing up steeped in this atmosphere of activism and unwavering belief in community. Their small apartment buzzed with plans, with grading papers late into the night, with laughter and debates about how to make a difference. Marcus had started keeping a journal, a worn, leather-bound book where he scribbled thoughts, frustrations, and blueprints for a better future. One entry Lila would later find read, "Justice isn't given, it's built." Brick by brick, heart by heart, lesson by lesson. The ring on Lila's finger was Marcus's grandmother's. A symbol of enduring love, of resilience through generations that had faced down their own share of injustices. When Marcus proposed, he'd slipped it onto her finger, saying, "This ring has seen struggle, and it's seen triumph, just like us, just like our people. It's a promise, Lila. A promise that we'll keep fighting, keep loving, keep building." Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the unthinkable happened. The kind of tragedy that splinters lives and shatters communities. A stray bullet from a gang dispute outside the school walls found its way through an open classroom window. Marcus, shielding a student who had frozen in panic, was struck. He died on the worn linoleum floor of his history classroom, the lesson on justice unfinished. The grief was a tidal wave, consuming Lila, threatening to drown her. The world turned gray. The injustice of it all. A man dedicated to peace and education, felled by the very violence he fought to steer his students away from, was a bitter, relentless ache. But in the darkest depths of her sorrow, Marcus's words, his spirit, began to shine through. Justice isn't given, it's built. His journal, now a sacred relic, became her guide. Maya, by then a bright, perceptive 12-year-old, would often find her mother poring over its pages, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. Maya herself would pick it up, tracing Marcus's handwriting, absorbing his wisdom. Lila couldn't go back to Carver High. The ghosts were too loud, but she couldn't abandon Marcus's mission or the children of their community. So, she channeled her grief, her rage, her unwavering love into something new. She sold the small house they'd finally managed to buy, cashed in her meager savings, and, with the help of friends and community members who revered Marcus, founded Bright Horizons. It started small, in a rented storefront, offering after-school tutoring, a safe space, a hot meal. Lila, drawing on an inner strength she didn't know she possessed, became its driving force. She wrote grants, organized fundraisers, mentored, counseled, and fiercely advocated for her kids. Bright Horizons grew, brick by brick, heart by heart, just as Marcus had written. It became a sanctuary, a beacon of hope in a neighborhood too often starved of it. It offered coding classes, art therapy, job training, a community garden, a holistic approach to nurturing young lives. Years passed. Maya, now a thoughtful young woman on the cusp of adolescence, had inherited her father's passion for justice and her mother's quiet resilience. She kept Marcus's journal close, its words a constant source of inspiration. Noah, too young to remember his father clearly, knew him through the stories, through the legacy embodied in Bright Horizons and in his mother's tireless work. Lila's work thrived. Bright Horizons became a celebrated example of community empowerment, its influence spreading. She even completed her PhD in urban policy, her dissertation focusing on sustainable community development in under-resourced areas, a testament to her deep understanding of the systemic issues she fought against daily. But a new storm was gathering, one more insidious than any blizzard. Gentrification. Developers, smelling profit, began to circle the neighborhood. Property values soared, pushing out long-time residents and small businesses. And the land on which Bright Horizons stood, the land Lila had poured her life into, the land that was a living memorial to Marcus, was owned by a rapidly expanding tech conglomerate, Hartwell Innovations. Julian Hartwell's company. The eviction notices had started arriving a few months ago, polite but firm. Hartwell Innovations had plans for a new luxury condo development complete with artisanal coffee shops and boutique fitness studios. A different kind of horizon, one that had no room for the bright horizons that served the existing community. Lila had fought, leveraged her policy knowledge, rallied support, but the legal machinery of corporate power was formidable. The final eviction date loomed. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. The man whose life she had saved in a snowstorm, the man who had sneered at her worn gloves, was the same man poised to destroy everything she and Marcus had built, everything that gave meaning to his sacrifice. The day Julian Hartwell scheduled his final inspection of the property, a perfunctory step before the bulldozers moved in, was a bright, crisp autumn afternoon. At Bright Horizons, however, the mood was anything but bright. Volunteers packed boxes with a somber air, children asked anxious questions Lila struggled to answer with her usual calm, and the weight of impending loss hung heavy. Julian Hartwell arrived in a black town car, his assistant, Priya Kapoor, trailing in his wake. Priya, a sharp, ambitious Indian-American woman in her early 30s, had been with Hartwell Innovations for 5 years. She'd initially been drawn by the company's innovative image, but lately a growing unease had taken root. She'd seen too many communities like this one assessed merely as underutilized assets, their human stories erased from balance sheets. This particular acquisition felt different, more brutal. Julian strode into Bright Horizons with the air of a conqueror surveying new territory. His eyes, cold and appraising, swept over the vibrant murals, the slightly too small desks, the earnest faces of the teenagers engaged in a coding workshop. He was calculating square footage, demolition costs, potential ROI. This was business. Emotions had no place here. Then he saw her. Across the bustling main room, directing a group of volunteers sorting donated books, was a woman whose face, etched with a familiar blend of weariness and strength, stopped him cold. Her locks were tied back, her sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. She turned, sensing his presence, her eyes meeting his. Recognition slammed into Julian with the force of a physical blow. The woman from the blizzard. The woman with the battered pickup and the ring. His meticulously ordered world tilted on its axis. "You," he stammered, the single word devoid of its usual authority. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the capable, unassuming woman on that snowy road with the director of this community center he was about to displace. Laya Grant's composure, usually an unshakable fortress, visibly cracked. The blood drained from her face. then rushed back in a wave of angry color. So this was him, the architect of their destruction. The man who had dismissed her so easily, now standing here to dismantle her life's work, Marcus's legacy. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice dangerously low, vibrating with a tightly controlled fury. "I should have known. The universe has a sick sense of humor." You're the director here?" Julian asked, still reeling. "I am Dr. Laya Grant, founder and director of Bright Horizons," she corrected him, her academic title a subtle assertion of her standing. "The same Dr. Grant who pulled your six-figure SUV out of a ditch while you fretted about your private jet." Her eyes, usually warm, were now like chips of obsidian. "And you're the man who would bulldoze a place that has saved countless children?" "A place that saved my own daughter." Julian flinched as if struck. His gaze darted around the room, no longer seeing abstract assets, but faces. Young faces, hopeful faces, faces that were now looking at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Just then, Maya, now a poised 16-year-old with her father's intelligent eyes and her mother's quiet strength, stepped forward. She had been helping in the corner, packing up art supplies, but the tension had drawn her in. In her hand, she held a worn, leather-bound journal. Marcus's journal. She walked directly up to Julian, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice clear and steady, though a slight tremor betrayed her emotion. "This was my father's journal." She held it up. "He was a teacher. He died in his classroom, protecting kids like the ones who come here. Kids this place protects every single day." Maya opened the journal to a marked page. He wrote, "Justice isn't given. It's built. Bright Horizons is that justice. It's his legacy. It's our home." She looked directly into Julian's eyes, her own shining with unshed tears but also with a fierce, unyielding spirit. "My dad died protecting children. What will your legacy be, Mr. Hartwell? What will they say you built by tearing this down?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Julian, a man rarely lost for words, found himself speechless. The arrogance, the impatience, the sheer force of will that had propelled him to the top of the tech world, all seemed to crumble before the earnest grief and righteous anger of this young girl. He saw not just Maya, but the ghost of a man he'd never known, a man who had given his life for something Julian was about to casually destroy for profit. Priya Kapoor, standing silently behind Julian, watched this exchange with a growing sense of shame and resolve. She had seen the projections, the profit margins. She had also seen the carefully worded memos from legal minimizing the community impact. But Maya's words, Lila's quiet, burning defiance, this was the truth, raw and undeniable. She thought of her own parents, immigrants who had sacrificed so much, who had taught her the value of community, of fairness. What was she doing here, complicit in this? Later that day, after Julian had made a hasty, mumbled retreat from Bright Horizons, visibly shaken, Priya made a decision. She had access to internal documents, feasibility studies, emails that painted a damning picture of Hartwell Innovation's aggressive land acquisition strategies, often targeting vulnerable communities, using legal loopholes and pressure tactics. She'd seen patterns of urban renewal that looked more like urban erasure. That evening, a secure, anonymous email landed in the inbox of a prominent investigative journalist. Contained a trove of documents. The subject line, "The true cost of Hartwell Innovation's progress." Priya knew the risks, but Maya's question echoed in her mind. What's your legacy? The collision at Bright Horizons had sent shockwaves far beyond its walls. For Julian, it was a direct hit to his conscience, a place he hadn't realized was still vulnerable. For Lila, it was a painful confirmation of the forces arrayed against them, but also a spark of renewed fight. And for Priya, it was the breaking point that pushed her from silent disillusionment to active resistance. The battle for Bright Horizons was far from over. It had just become deeply, irrevocably personal. The encounter at Bright Horizons left Julian Hartwell profoundly unsettled. Maya's question, "What's your legacy?" played on a loop in his mind, an insistent, unwelcome soundtrack to his usually ordered thoughts. He retreated to his palatial estate on Lake Geneva, a monument to his success, all glass and steel and cold, minimalist perfection. But for the first time, the opulence felt hollow, the silence accusatory. He couldn't shake the image of Laya Grant, the woman from the blizzard, the grieving widow, the fierce protector. And that ring. It still bothered him, that incongruous symbol of wealth on the hand of a woman who seemed to embody selfless service. Haunted and restless, Julian did something he hadn't done in years. He acted on impulse, without consulting his schedule or his advisors. The next afternoon, he drove himself, not in his showy SUV, but in an unremarkable sedan from his fleet, back to the neighborhood he was planning to raise. He parked a block away from bright horizons and walked, an anonymous figure in a simple jacket and baseball cap. He didn't go inside. He stood across the street, watching. The center was a hive of activity even under the shadow of eviction. Kids poured out, laughing, some with books, others with art projects. Volunteers arrived with donations. He saw Lila moving through the controlled chaos with a calm authority, offering a reassuring word here, a gentle touch there. She was organizing a food distribution line for what looked like homeless teenagers, her expression one of profound compassion. As she handed a young man a warm meal, her left hand caught the afternoon sun, and the ring glinted, that same intricate, antique ring. It seemed to pulse with a light of its own, a beacon of quiet dignity amidst the struggle. Julian watched her, this woman who had every right to despise him, serving others with unwavering grace. He remembered his own childhood, the gnawing hunger, the worn-out shoes, the constant fear of eviction that had fueled his relentless drive for wealth and security. He'd thought money was the armor, the ultimate protection. I thought wealth erased who I was, he found himself thinking, the admission a raw whisper in his mind. He'd wanted to build walls so high poverty could never touch him again. But what if, in building those walls, he'd entombed his own humanity? Later that evening, back in his sterile office, the unease gnawed at him. He couldn't focus on the quarterly reports, the stock projections. He opened his laptop and, instead of market analyses, he typed Dr. Laya Grant and Bright Horizons into the search bar. Article after article appeared. Community awards. Local news stories praising her tireless work. Testimonials from young people whose lives had been turned around by the center. And then he found it, her academic profile. Laya Grant, PhD in Urban Policy from Northwestern University. Her dissertation, Sustainable Economic Empowerment in Historically Under-Resourced Urban Communities, a Case Study Approach. He stared at the screen. This wasn't just a kind woman running a local charity. This was a highly educated, deeply knowledgeable expert in the very field his company was so carelessly trampling. The woman he'd dismissed with a $100 bill and a smirk possessed an intellectual arsenal he hadn't even fathomed. The realization was another blow, chipping away further at his crumbling edifice of arrogance. The next morning, as Julian was wrestling with these uncomfortable truths, his phone buzzed. It was his head of HR, Priya had resigned. No explanation, just a polite, firm email. Julian felt a strange pang, not of anger, but of something akin to understanding. He was beginning to see the cracks not just in his own worldview, but in the very foundations of his empire. Lila, meanwhile, was fighting her own battles. The leaked documents, now splashed across headlines, had ignited a firestorm. Hartwell Innovations under scrutiny for predatory land grabs, one blared. Public opinion was turning. City council members were asking questions. But the legal eviction order still stood. Time was running out. One evening, Julian found himself driving back to Bright Horizons. This time, he didn't lurk across the street. He walked up to the door, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm he hadn't felt since his first major pitch meeting decades ago. Lila was locking up, looking exhausted but resolute. She saw him and her body tensed. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the fire from their last encounter, replaced by a profound weariness. "Dr. Grant," he began, then hesitated. The carefully constructed apologies he'd rehearsed in his head felt trite. I read your dissertation." Lila blinked, surprised. "You did?" "Yes. It's impressive." He paused. "I grew up poor, dirt poor, in a neighborhood not unlike this one. I clawed my way out. I thought wealth was the answer, that it erased where I came from." Lila looked at him, her gaze searching. "But you erased others to keep it, Mr. Hartwell. You erased their homes, their communities, their histories. Did you think we were less deserving of a horizon than you?" Her words were not an attack, but a statement of fact, delivered with a quiet sorrow that cut deeper than any anger could have. Julian had no answer. He saw the pain in her eyes, the unwavering commitment to her cause, and for the first time, he truly understood the human cost of his ambition. "That ring," he said, nodding towards her hand, the question that had been nagging him finally finding voice. "It's remarkable." Lila glanced down at Marcus's grandmother's ring. A soft, sad smile touched her lips. "It was my husband's grandmother's. He gave it to me. It represents generations of love, struggle, and survival. It reminds me what's truly valuable." She met his gaze. Things you can't buy, Mr. Hartwell. And things you shouldn't destroy. Julian drove away from bright horizons that night a changed man. The thaw had begun. The ice around his heart, so carefully cultivated over years of ruthless business dealings, was starting to crack. He knew he couldn't undo all the harm he had caused. But perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to change the ending of this particular story. Later that week, Lila received an unexpected call. It was Priya Kapoor. "Dr. Grant," Priya said, her voice clear and confident. "I've just resigned from Hartwell Innovations. I've been following your work for some time and, well, I believe in what you're doing. If you'll have me, I'd like to offer my expertise. I'd be honored to join your board." Lila was momentarily speechless. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. A new ally. A sign, perhaps, that the tide was beginning to turn. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal wrangling, and intense public pressure. The leaked documents had done their work, exposing the underbelly of Hartwell Innovations' expansion. Julian Hartwell, facing a PR nightmare and a genuine crisis of conscience, made a decision that stunned the business world and sent ripples of hope through Lila's community. The scene was not one of demolition, but of groundbreaking. A crisp winter morning, months after the blizzard that first brought Lila and Julian together. A light snow, reminiscent of that fateful night, dusted the grounds of Bright Horizons. But this time, the atmosphere was one of celebration, of triumph. A crowd had gathered, community members, children from the center, local activists, and a swarm of reporters and news cameras. A large banner proclaimed, "The New Bright Horizons, Building Futures, Honoring Legacies." Julian Hartwell stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, not in his usual power suit, but in a simple woolen coat. He looked different. Less polished, perhaps, but more human. He had not only halted the eviction but had gone a step further. He transferred the deed for the land and several adjoining lots to Lila's nonprofit. Furthermore, he had pledged substantial funding for a state-of-the-art expansion, including a new youth technology and innovation lab. A reporter, microphone thrust forward, approached him. "Mr. Hartwell, a stunning reversal. What prompted this extraordinary change of heart? This is a multi-million-dollar turnaround." Julian looked away from the cameras, his gaze finding Maya, who stood beside her mother, a proud, radiant smile on her face. Maya was now volunteering at the center, teaching younger kids the basics of coding, her father's journal tucked into her bag. He then looked at Lila, who was watching him with a cautious, appraising look. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening. Julian cleared his throat. "Let's just say," he began, his voice softer than the reporters were used to. "Someone reminded me that things, and people, aren't always what they seem at first glance." He paused, a faint, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "Someone reminded me that the true worth of a ring or a person isn't about the price tag you assign it. It's about the story it holds, the legacy it represents." Later, during the formal ceremony, Laya Grant stepped to the podium. Her voice, strong and clear, resonated with emotion. "Today," she said, "we are not just breaking ground for a new building. We are reaffirming our commitment to this community, to our children, to the belief that every single life has value, every dream deserves a chance to take flight." She spoke of Marcus, of his enduring vision. Then she held up his worn leather journal. "My husband, Marcus, wrote in this journal, 'Justice isn't given, it's built.' Today we honor his words." She walked over to the newly laid foundation stone of the expanded center. With tears in her eyes, but a resolute set to her jaw, she carefully pinned the open journal to a temporary wooden frame that would soon be encased within the new walls, a symbolic heart for the new Bright Horizons. The inscription faced outwards, "Justice built here." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of emotion washing over them. Maya hugged her mother tightly. Priya Kapoor, now a dedicated board member, beamed from the front row. As the ceremony wound down and the crowd began to mingle, sharing hot cider and hope, the snow began to fall more steadily. A small section of the walkway near the entrance was becoming slick. Without a word, Julian Hartwell, the tech mogul, the billionaire, picked up a stray shovel that leaned against a pile of construction materials. He began to clear the snow from the path, his movements awkward at first, then more rhythmic. It was, perhaps, the first piece of unpaid, manual labor he had performed in decades. Lila watched him for a moment, a complex array of emotions on her face. She walked over, not with anger or even gratitude, but with a simple acknowledgement. She handed him a pair of spare work gloves, much like the ones she'd worn that night in the blizzard. "Here," she said. You'll get blisters. Julian looked at the gloves, then at her. He took them, a flicker of the old Julian surfacing as a wry smile. Thank you, Dr. Grant. Lila, she corrected gently. Call me Lila. He nodded, then returned to his shoveling, the rhythmic scrape of metal on concrete a quiet counterpoint to the joyful chatter of the crowd. He was no longer just Julian Hartwell, CEO. He was a man beginning to understand that building something of true value often required tearing down old assumptions, starting with his own. The storm had passed, both the one that raged that winter night and the one that had threatened to consume bright horizons. What remained was a landscape altered, not by destruction, but by a difficult, transformative thaw. A community saved, a legacy redefined, and a powerful lesson learned. In the quiet after the storm, the world listens best to those it once ignored. Julian Hartwell's journey from arrogance to humility and Laya Grant's unwavering fight for her community reminds us that true worth is not measured in dollars but in dignity, compassion, and the courage to build justice brick by brick. It challenges us to look beyond surfaces, to question our own biases, and to consider the legacy we are all creating every single day. What would you do if you held the power to destroy someone's dream or to help them build it? How do you measure the value of a community, of a human life? If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with your friends who believe in the power of community and second chances, and subscribe for more stories that make you think and feel. Tell us in the comments, what does building justice mean to you in your own community? We'd love to hear your thoughts.